Next up, with Photoshop, we're going to be looking at making more selections, and we're also going to introduce layers with this next exercise. So let's talk about layers for a second. Layers are one of the most, if not the most powerful aspects of digital image editors, pixel-based digital image editors especially, so things like Photoshop. And the reason why this is because it gives you the flexibility to really develop an image, to add different effects, to combine different images, to manipulate images and transform images without losing the information that might be below an effect or below a different transformation. Or for instance, if you're trying to combine two different images together, you can use layers to do it in a way that allows you to retain the pixel information of both images, even though you might be overlapping them. And one way to think of layers is if you're creating a big image out of stacks and stacks of drawings and colors and effects that are applied to transparency. So you can see, in a lot of cases, you can see the image that's below the different levels of transparency, except where there are parts of image on those transparent stacks. And then when you combine them all together, where you merge all those different images together, it creates one final composition. And that is the way that Photoshop works, so that you can make adjustments to a single layer without making changes to the whole image. And this is also why I have you save everything in Photoshop, because Photoshop files retain the layers that you're working with. So you can develop an image, get to a point, and then start working on it again and move a layer around, and you still have all the pixels that were below that layer in another layer. So we're going to talk a lot more about this in future exercises. But this first exercise is really just to get an idea of what you can start to do with layers. And we're also going to be looking at lighting. So the photograph you see here is a photograph taken by a contemporary artist, David Burnett. And so he considers himself a journalistic photographer, which means that he's going out into the world to find, and the environment to find his subjects and to photograph his subjects. And this is different to studio photographers who are bringing people in to their studios, setting up lighting and different scenes, and being able to really control a lot of specifics regarding their subjects. When you're working in a more of a journalistic standpoint or perspective, or when you're going out and trying to photograph things within their own environment and the environment that surrounds you, you're having to deal with a lot of things that you can't totally control. So David Burnett is a person that is known for the lighting and the dramatic lighting that he's able to achieve in his photographs. And I think that is especially interesting and worth noting, and the reason why we're looking at it for this exercise is because he is doing all of that with decisions that he's making in terms of framing, and also in terms of the film he's using, the camera settings he's using, and even the cameras themselves that he's using. So he is deciding to take these photographs. He's looking at where the light is coming from, where it's coming from in regards to the subject. He's deciding, is he wanting to shoot when it's cloudy? Is he waiting for it to clear up for a moment? Is he going to shoot and knowing where these different shadows are falling or where these different highlights are falling, and also knowing that he can't control all those things. So in this photograph, for example, this is Al Gore during a campaign event. It's not like David Burnett can sit there and say, okay, so now I'm going to have you put your hand up right when the clouds are clearing, and this is going to happen, and it's going to be this perfect photograph. So he's having to make all these decisions as he is taking these photographs. And I think when these images are coming together, the ones that are most successful are the ones where the photographer is making their set of choices, and they're deciding, okay, this is the setting that I want, this is the film speed that I'm using, all these different things. This is where I want to take the photograph from. This is how much I want to frame this highlight, or this is what I want to focus on in shadow. And then you're also having to work with these outside things that you can't really change. For instance, what's going to happen with the sky? What's going to happen as the sun sets? And I think that when these images, the ones that are really successful are when the photographer's choices and some of the risks that they take, they work with what ends up being thrown at them based on the environment and also the actions of their subject and the people around their subject. So I think that these are really interesting techniques and visual principles to look at and to think about when you're working with digital tools, because Photoshop, it does allow you to enhance different lighting effects. So you can take a photograph and then you can bring it into Photoshop and you can increase the amount of shadow or increase the amount of brightness, increase the amount of highlights, and try to approximate those things. And it's a good exercise in thinking as for yourself as an artist, what it means to be adding those things in post-production, so adding those things digitally, or what it means to be having really specific intentions when you're taking the photograph and knowing where those shadows are, and then maybe you're going to then work with those in a digital environment. So there is a decision for you to make as an artist. Are you going to add these effects after? Are you going to try and achieve them strictly with the analog settings on your camera and the other environmental choices and the framing that you're deciding to take when you're taking the photo? Or is this something that you are very aware of when you're taking the photograph, and you know that you want to develop even further in the digital environment? Because there are a lot of different lighting effects that you can't really control in an analog state, and so these are all, again, things that you get to decide and really have to do with ultimately what your final goal is, what kind of aesthetic you're trying to achieve, and what you're trying to use this digital tool for. Are you trying to use it to enhance lighting? Are you trying to use it to create lighting that can exist in the real world? Or are you trying to use it to further develop lighting decisions and choices that you're making when you're taking your photographs? So these are all great things to keep in mind when you're working with these processes. So let's go to the environment, digital working environment. All right, so we're going to be working again with your self-portrait, and I'm going to be introducing a couple of new things, and then also just reviewing a couple of things, so spending a little bit less time on some of the stuff that we've already done. So first off, I want to crop this. So I'm going to hit my crop tool and then use that handle and then press enter to finalize the crop. And then I'm going to turn this whole thing black and white. We're going to start working with color in the next exercise, but for now, I want everyone to be working in black and white. So I'm going to go up to Image, Adjustments, and then Black and White, or the shortcut is Command-Option-Shift-B. That's kind of a long one, but you might want to learn it because we're going to be using this a bit throughout the quarter. All right, so now let's talk about layers. So because you're bringing these in from photos that you took with your phone or a camera and then save them as a Photoshop file, most of you in your Layers tab, which is over on this right-hand side, this lower right-hand tab, you're just going to see you have one layer in your image, and that is your background layer. And that's most likely going to be your portrait. So very quickly, we are going to change this. So first what I want you to do is I want you to select your entire image, so Command A, that's also under Select, and then choose All. And then go up to Edit and say Copy, or Command C. It's definitely Very important shortcuts to learn. And then I'm going to come over here into my layers tab, and I'm going to create a new layer by hitting that little new layer icon. And so up here now I suddenly have layer 1, and then I have this background, and I'm going to, while making sure that layer 1 is selected, I'm going to paste, and now I have a duplicate image pasted into layer 1. So I'm going to also now clear my background. So first I'm going to select I'm going to hide my layer 1, so I'm going to hide that. Right now this shouldn't be changing anything in your composition because when you copy and paste it places in the exact same spot in your image, so you're not seeing any difference. And you haven't made any adjustments to layer 1 that would make it different from the background, but we're going to do that right now. I'm going to now select all again, so Command A, and then I'm going to clear my background. And to do that, you can either go up to Edit and go to Clear, or you can just hit the Delete key. And then it comes up with this dialog box, and this is basically asking, okay, do you want to fill this with some color, or do you want to clear it and try and keep the shadow? And I'm just going to say white, and I'm going to keep the opacity, and I'm going to say okay. So now I'm going to deselect, so Command D, or under Select, deselect. So now I have a purely white background. I'm going to go up to my layer 1 and show it again by hitting that little eye icon. And now I have 2 layers in my image, a white background and a layer 1. All right, so next I'm going to duplicate this layer. And you can do that by selecting the layer that you want to duplicate, go up to Layer, and then go to Duplicate Layer. Or you can Control click or right click if you are on a PC or a 3-button mouse where it says layer 1, and then you can go up here to duplicate layer. And hopefully that's showing, yeah, that's showing up mostly in the video screen. All right, and then I'm going to just change this to say layer 2, just because since I'm duplicating it, it's going to look exactly like layer 1. So this is just to help me. None of these names matter. You can name them whatever you want, but as I have said before, name things so that you know what they are. I've had so many issues in the past where I've named things like completely inexplicable names, or I've just kept things that say untitled, and then 10 weeks down the line I'm trying to find the thing that I did first week, and I have like untitled images like 1 through like 197. It's really hard to tell which one is which. So it can be helpful to actually name things and not just have them be like gobbledygook, which I know happens, but that's okay. Anyway, all right, so now I have 2 duplicate layers and then a 3rd background white layer. And you're still not really seeing any change when I'm hiding layer 2, again, because layer 2 is exactly the same thing as layer 1. Now, let's move this layer around a little bit so we can actually see what I'm talking about when I'm talking about layers. So I'm going to go here to that Move tool. It's also shortcut V, very, very important. I'm going to make sure that I have layer 2 selected, and I'm going to move this. And you can start to see over here on this left-hand side that it is indeed as though I have another layer on top. And now I'm moving around this layer, and even when I move it off the work canvas area, it still is showing up when I bring it back. And so this is what I'm saying when I mean I can make changes to this layer, and very quickly, let's delete a big chunk out of there. And now, so I've deleted this part of this layer, but I have not changed the layer below. So even though I have taken a chunk out of my eye and my face in this layer, it hasn't messed with the layer below. And that's what I mean when I'm talking about how you can make edits and adjustments and transformations to one layer where you don't need to worry about it messing with the layers that are below that layer or above that layer. So I'm going to show this again, and I actually kind of like this strange distortion that I created. And then I'm going to show you a couple of different ways to start working with the idea that your layers can have different levels of transparency and also blending modes so that they interact with one another differently. So I'm making sure again that I have layer 2 selected. I'm going to go over to the opacity property in the layers tab. I'm going to change this to 50%. So now what you're seeing is except the area that I had removed. So and if you zoom in and you look here, you'll see there's this kind of white area where I had taken out that circle. But for the most part, what you're seeing now is layer 2 is 50% transparent. So you see 50% of layer 1 coming from below it, and that's you're getting this interesting double vision thing that's happening. And I can move this around, and it's still retaining this opacity. And I can make this more opaque. So the more opaque something is, the less transparent it is. Or yes, the more opaque it is. And then, or less opaque. So I can go down to 22% or 25%. Another way to start working with different ideas of transparency and also different ways that the layers interact with one another is by going over here and adjusting the layers blending mode. And those can be found, right now it says normal. Every new layer that you start with, it always is going to say normal. But if you click it, you'll get a huge list of these different blending modes. And these are mostly based on different darkroom and screen properties that you can achieve with analog processes. So Photoshop was originally created to approximate a lot of different darkroom properties and procedures and processes. And so a lot of these blending modes are based on things that you can do in the darkroom. So I'm going to select multiply. And I'm going to make my opacity go back to 100. And so now you see, even though the opacity is 100%, and so if with a normal blending mode, you would just see this image on top of, you wouldn't see any under image, or you wouldn't see layer 1 below it, because the blending mode is now multiply. What that is doing is that is saying the way that this is interacting with any of the layers below it is areas that are dark are all acting as though they're transparent. So they're being merged with whatever is below them. But areas that are white are acting as though, the areas that are dark are solid, and they're just merging and combining with whatever is below. So you're seeing both the layers together. And then whatever is white is seen as transparent. So instead of the white areas blocking out whatever is below them, what is now white is transparent. So you're actually seeing layer 1 below. And what you're seeing as white is not the color of layer 2. It's actually just the background, and then also the white in layer 1. And I'm going to show you what I'm talking about when I say that. So I'm going to go over here to my color palette. So it's in this toolbar here. So this is how you choose colors, and we're just going to be working with black and white for this exercise. So I'm going to go over here. If you have a color selected here, there's a couple of ways to go back to black and white. You can select this square, and then it comes up with a color picker, and you can just, and black and white, wherever you are on the color spectrum, you can always get to black and white by going on the left-hand side. I'm going to cancel this. Another way to do this is just to select this little icon above that, and then and this is saying this is your fill color, the color on top. The color below is the background color, and this is something that you have to set for different properties and tools that we're going to be using a little bit later. But just know the way to switch this quickly is to just hit these little arrows, and then that will switch. So now my fill color is white. Oh, I actually want it to be black. So I'm going to go switch it again, go back to black. I'm going to select my paint bucket tool, which if you haven't opened Photoshop before, it might say gradient tool, but I'm going to go to the paint bucket, and then I'm going to make sure I'm in the background layer, and I'm going to press this. And now you see, even though my background is black, the white that you are seeing is actually just the white of layer 1. And this will be important in a second. So now, if I make layer 1 multiply as well, we're going to lose all of the black. Right. So now everything's just blending together. So I don't actually want to do that, but I was just showing you this in order to illustrate what I was talking about in terms of different blending modes, because it really can change the appearance and the way that different layers will interact with one another. So I'm going to go back to my background. I'm going to switch the fill color again. I'm going to hit G, and I'm going to fill that back to white. So you can start to see what these different layers are doing by hiding and showing them differently. And remember that this is not deleting the layers, this is only hiding them. So I'm going to keep this. So I'm going to keep this multiply effect, and I'm going to set this to 50%. And then I'm going to start doing a couple of lighting changes. And this can be a good place for you to pause and to just start going through and working with some of these different blending modes. And remember to always make sure that you have the layer selected that you're trying to create any changes with or edits or adjust. And this is one of the biggest things that happens when you're first working with layers, and still now to me all the time. I'll be trying to change something, and I'll have a selection and be trying to move something or trying to adjust something, and I'm just sitting there saying, why isn't this working? Why isn't this working? It's because the first thing you do if you're trying to do something and you're not seeing it happen is you just need to go over and make sure that the layer that you are trying to adjust is the one that you have selected. That is the number one thing that happens when you're trying to do something and you're just like, why isn't this working? Anyway, all right. So now I want to adjust some of the lighting in this layer 1. And I'm going to leave layer 2 up because I want to be able to see how the whole image is going to be working together. But I am going to be wanting to work only with layer 1, so I'm probably going to be going back and forth and hiding this sometimes, and I definitely want to make sure that layer 1 is selected. So for now, I'm going to hide this. So now I want to talk about very quickly a couple of the different options for making selections. In the last exercise, I showed you this tool, the rectangular marquee tool and the elliptical marquee tool. And if you hold these down, you can make perfect squares or perfect circles if you're holding down Shift when you're dragging them out. But they don't give you the options to select any kinds of shapes. And I really want to do that for this. So these are your options for making more complex selections. So I'm going to start with the polygonal lasso tool, and what this does is this allows you to create polygons. And the way that I'm doing this is I'm just clicking the mouse once, clicking it again, clicking it again. If you want to close it, you can bring it all the way over, and then you get that little circle by the icon of your cursor, or you can just double click and then it will complete it'll finish the selection by drawing the closest line between the starting and the ending points. Now, if you wanted to draw, for instance, if I wanted to make my eyes lighter, I could use this tool to select my eye. And one way to do this is if you zoom in. So you can select this zoom tool and then bring it over and then click where you want to zoom in. I rarely use that tool. Instead, we'll use the shortcut key Command- and Command+. It's way faster because you don't have to switch back and forth. And then so I'm going to zoom in here and then trace where my eye is. And so what's happening here is that even though this is really just a complex polygon, because of the resolution of the image and because these are bitmap or raster images, you can never select any less than a pixel, because that's the lowest unit of information that you're working with bitmap and raster images. And so what that means is that even if you have curves and they look like curves or look like circles, when you zoom in, you'll see that it really just turns into, it's ultimately is a jagged line of like diagonal steps. So when you're working with selections, and I was just zoomed in like 200% there. So this is as zoomed in as it's ever going to get, because this is 100% of my image. So that is enough to approximate a curve. So I can go there, and then I'm going to adjust the level here. So I'm going to go to Command L, and I want to lighten this up. And say OK, and then I'm going to Command D to deselect. And so now you can see how I was able to create a more complex selection using this polygonal lasso tool. Now the other lasso tool you can get, and you're just holding down your cursor to select these different ones, this is the freehand one. And this is something that can be useful when you are either creating selections that you're going to feather, which I'm going to talk about in just a second, or when you have a tablet, and if you have a lot of dexterity and coordination and accuracy when you're able to use a tablet. So it's using a brush tool to be able to create, to essentially draw on the screen. That's where this freehand lasso tool can be faster when you're creating selections. And this you're just holding down and then drawing out these selections. Now, another option is to use this quick selection tool. And what this does is this kind of learns. So if you're wanting to select areas that are primarily dark or light, you can select it, and then without holding down Shift even, it's processing and saying, okay, I think that this person is wanting to select these darker areas. And then, for instance, I just selected all my forehead. I didn't want to do that. So it's the way to undo that and to continue to teach the tool and say, okay, no, this isn't what I'm trying to do, is you press down the Alt or Option key, and then that allows you to remove the selection. And you can either go one click at a time, or you can hold it down as though it's a brush. And so what will happen is that it will hopefully begin to intuit where you're trying to select. And so this works a lot more. This can work better with images that have a higher level of contrast, or when you're starting to work with color. And it also really depends on the way that you're using it to try and teach the tool what your intentions are. And we're not really going to use it for this first exercise. So what I want to do now is I just want to show a couple of different ways to create shadow and enhance shadow, or enhance different lighting. And that's going to be just the last couple minutes of this tutorial, and then you're going to take those ideas and continue them to finish this exercise the way that you want. So what I want to do with this bottom layer is I want to create a sense, I want to accentuate the shadows that are naturally falling on this side of my face. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to create a rough selection using this lasso tool. I'm going to zoom in a little bit. I'm going to just very roughly get this left-hand side of my face. Actually, I'm going to do this side of my face because I have my white eye already. There. So now that I have this selection, it's not very accurate, and I don't really want it to be, because I want it to look a little bit more like a natural shadow than something that I drew. And so what I'm going to do with this is I'm going to feather this selection. So I can go up to Select, and then I'm going to go here to Modify, and I'm going to say Feather. And then what this does is that this creates less of a extreme border. Right now, before I feather this, all the pixels up until this marquee are selected, and all the pixels after this marquee or outside this marquee are not selected. And there's a very hard edge that happens. So to show you what I mean, let me adjust the levels here. So I did that and I get, whoa, man, this thing keeps glitching. I did that and I say okay, and then when I deselect, I see that there is this very extreme edge that I have here. And maybe that's something that you want to do. However, it doesn't look very natural, and you don't want to be doing things because you don't know how to do the opposite, or you don't know how you would make this when you're working with digital tools in general. It's always good to know the different options you have, because then you can start making more and more choices based on your intentions and what you're trying to do versus what you know how to do and what you don't know how to do. So I'm going to go up to my history because I want to go back to that selection. And if you guys have been working at all with the undo function, you know that you can only undo, I'm hitting Command Z, and you can also do this with the edit menu, but you can only undo one step. So I want to go up more than one step, so I'm going to go up here to my history icon, and if it's not showing up, you go to Window and you can open it up here. But this opens up my history tab, and then I can actually go back as many steps as I want. And then I can just close this tab. And now I'm going to feather this. So I'm going to go back up to Select, Modify, Feather. I want to have pretty intense feathers. So I think I'm going to do, let's say 15 pixels. And then I'm going to say okay. And now when I adjust my levels, and you can see how I'm going to say okay, and then I'm going to deselect, and now that there isn't such a extreme border. So now instead of it looking very unnatural and having that very extreme border, it's coming across almost as it could be natural. And these are things that you are deciding, and I'm just trying to show you that these different effects or these different choices are available when you're working with these tools. Okay, so I am going to then expand that. So now you can start to see how I'm working with these concepts of, I'm enhancing the natural lighting of the original photograph that I took, and I'm also adding lighting and effects that wouldn't have been possible if not, or at least not easy, if I had been trying to add this with actual lighting in the environment where I was taking the photograph. And you can start to see how you can use these to really develop your image and to really explore what lighting effects you can do, and also, again, the different levels of meaning that you can have with your photographs. So this is where I am adding lighting effects, using different selection processes, using different blending modes and different layers, and then I'm also developing lighting effects from scratch within the Photoshop environment. Okay, so this is a great place for everyone to start working with their own exercises, and I'm looking for at least 2 layers where you're working with different blending modes, and then also using different selections other than the rectangle or the circle to enhance lighting from your photograph and also add your own lighting effects to your self-portraits. So make sure that you save your Photoshop file. It's really important now because we're working with layers, and you want to save those layers because you can go back and change them for future exercises, or let's say you want to continue to develop your image. So yes, save your Photoshop file and then follow the posted instructions to export and submit this exercise.